Hindsight's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing to be able to look back and say, well, that wasn't an infallible pronouncement. Interestingly enough, Rome has never made an infallible pronouncement that wasn't an infallible pronouncement. In fact, there is no infallible list of infallible pronouncements. Chapman's theory is one of many theories. It wasn't one that Panacci or Hefele or Newman understood in their day, and they were brilliant scholars. So are we left with, well, this is one theory. Remember, folks, we're talking about a system that binds an infallible authority upon us, and by that says that you must believe these things as part of the gospel. Infallible authorities cannot be proven on the basis of theories and presuppositions. Infallible authorities require infallible authority. Now, a reference was made to the Council of Nicaea. And it was, so see, you have the papal legates in charge of this. Scholars recognize the papal legates were not in charge of Nicaea, and in point of fact, had nothing to do with what happened at Nicaea. The reason they were allowed to sign first is they were some of the very few Westerners who were even there. And in point of fact, the defense of the deity of Christ defined the Council of Nicaea in the following generations fell not to the Bishop of Rome, but to Athanasius in Alexandria. Even when the Bishop of Rome collapsed on that issue, it was Athanasius who stood firm. So there's a vast difference between the Christianity of the early 4th century and the much more developed papalism of the late 7th century. No one questions that Pope Agatho used very highly exalted words of himself. In fact, he's the first to use Luke 20:22 in the way that modern Roman Catholic apologists do. But the fact remains that if you had lived in those days and you had read the letters of Honorius, how would you have known what Agatho was going to say 40 years later? If you read a papal encyclical today, if you read Humanae Vitae, if you read Dominus Jesus that just came out August 6th, how do you know that what it teaches will be considered infallible after the current pope has died and a new pope takes his place? The simple fact of the matter is, friends, you don't know. Church history proves over and over again you have no way of knowing. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Sungenis, can you give us infallible certainty from the Bishop of Rome, where he has specifically said that the theory that you've advanced, which isn't the theory that the last person I debated on this subject advanced, why is your theory sufficient and the theories presented by other Roman Catholic apologists and scholars are not? Because these issues, as I said, go to the gospel itself. Thank you.
Dr. White said that hindsight is wonderful. And yes, it is, on very many occasions. He said that Rome never made an infallible announcement of the issue of Honorius. Well, they did that in 1870, when the Pope gave us the criterion for infallibility. Now, logically, how could the Pope give us a criterion for infallibility, knowing that Honorius had made a misstatement and still declared the papacy to be infallible? He must have known about the issue of Honorius, and he must have studied it very well. That he did. And that's why he gave 5 criterion, not just 1 or 2 that Dr. White has presented to us for Honorius. He says that these are just theories and presuppositions. But I don't think Pope Agatho, who told the Sixth Council that they were indeed correct in condemning Honorius, and says, I do this by my infallible authority, and the Sixth Council in turn praised Agatho for doing that. Not only did the Sixth Council do that, but the Emperor himself said that Agatho spoke for Peter. I don't find much disagreement in the 7th century that Agatho had that power. The only one that's disagreeing with that right now is Dr. White and the heretics who held to the Monothelite heresy. Agatho was the first to use Luke 22 as Dr. White's claim, and that's not true. That was used many centuries prior. He said, why is my theory the best theory? Well, let me turn the tables a little bit here. In the Bible, they found over 1,000 alleged errors and discrepancies. And each of you has struggled to valiantly decide what is the best way to explain those. Not all of those agree with each other. there are many different explanations how to explain the contradictions in the Bible. And yet you all know that behind all that there is no contradiction in the Bible, even though you have different explanations. Well, that's the same thing that we're doing here tonight. We are men. We're fallible men, as a matter of fact, and we seek to know the truth. And some of us may have different solutions to the problem. The point, in fact, is we're searching for the best solution, and I'm trying to explain that to you. The church has already decided that there is no problem. It is my job to communicate that to you. So just as you have the same problem that we do, we're all in the same boat. And he said, how would you know, unless it was 40 years hence, whether this doctrine was true or false? Well, that's not a criterion for your salvation, number one. Whether you know whether Christ has one or two wills does not mean that you're going to go to hell if you even hold that view. As a matter of fact, those who did hold that view back in those times were not responsible for it because that was not a defined dogma of the church. And God does not condemn anybody for holding something that's not defined, that's not held up to be bound by the Pope. The Pope never bound anybody to it. That's the whole issue here, that he never bound anybody to it. It was a letter he wrote to Sergius. So that it really affects us in no way. There's no problem here.